Hello, and welcome to the first in a series of 4 podcasts from Public Health Scotland and Suicide Prevention Scotland. This series is aimed at the diverse workforce of people taking action around sensitive and sometimes distressing topics such as mental health and suicide. The podcast will explore ways in which staff can keep themselves and colleagues safe and supported, recognising the potential for this work to have a negative impact on wellbeing and mental health. There are many ways in which staff working in these areas are exposed to upsetting information that can at times feel overwhelming, even if we're not in patient or client-facing roles. With these podcasts, we'll share ways to help you look after yourself and the people around you, learn how to spend some time on nurturing and caring for yourself, and the things you can do to maintain your well-being and thrive in your role. My name is Janet Watson. I'm a counsellor, writer and former journalist, and I've worked closely with client trauma as well as experiencing it myself. I've always been interested in what makes people tick and have recently come to understand the importance of being my own client and keeping a weather eye on my own mental health. Exposure to difficult information, data and discussions in our work lives can become very normal, but it can chip away at our resilience if we let it. Just stop and think for a second. I'm assuming you found this podcast because of your personal experience of working with what we call the difficult stuff. In your daily work life, you might hear or read details about things like death, suicide, addiction, mental illness, violence, rape or abuse. And this might have become very normal for you. Maybe after listening to this, you could get a notebook and jot down the things that are pretty routine for you, but might feel pretty shocking to people you know who do different kinds of work. How often lately have you heard friends and family saying they avoid the news these days because it's too overwhelming? We all have the choice to avoid the media, but when our workplace roles don't allow us much choice, how do we deal with it? When we can't step away from someone talking about their distress, or from a report containing data we'd rather not know about. It's what we're paid to do after all, but trauma is not normal, and we shouldn't forget that. And we can often become so focused on the needs of others or the task at hand that we forget about ourselves. So while you listen to this series of podcasts, can I suggest something? That you ruthlessly banish all thoughts of others' needs, be they family, friends, clients or organisations, and embrace a strange new thought, that it is you alone who matters. Can you put yourself first? You may be a manager or a leader in an organisation with responsibility for the safety and well-being of others. However, remember the air safety instructions about fitting our own oxygen mask before helping others do the same? This podcast aims to help everyone to focus on their own needs, individually and collectively, secure in the knowledge that this will have a positive effect for everyone, yourself, your peers, and your staff. In this first episode, we'll be looking at the kind of toll working with upsetting data and information can take. When thoughts of the things we've been working on intrude into our relaxation or socialising time. To some extent, of course, this is normal and to be expected. We're human after all. But it's our very humanness which can lead to more serious problems. Knowing what coping and not coping look like is so important. We'll be looking at ways to help ourselves in the next episode. But in this first one, we're taking a closer look at things you'll have heard of but might not fully understand. Compassion fatigue, burnout, and vicarious trauma. How ignoring our own needs can lead to poor mental health in ourselves, resulting in loss of motivation and productivity, but sometimes to more serious problems. Someone who is very aware of how these things can creep up on us is Andy Hardie. Andy is Clinical Director of Lifelink, a wellbeing and counselling service in Glasgow, and has worked in many different settings, including charities, schools, hospitals and prisons. He's a forensic psychotherapist, and we have known each other since doing our counselling training together many moons ago. I'm also joined by Susie Heywood from Public Health Scotland. Susie works as part of the public mental health team. As well as working on a difficult topic herself, suicide prevention, She's also led on a survey of staff across Public Health Scotland to learn more about their needs when it comes to working with sensitive and potentially upsetting data and information. In our conversation, Andy and Susie share some of their views and experiences of working closely with difficult issues and how this can affect our well-being. Andy and Susie, all three of us in different ways, have experience of working with difficult topics, different client groups and in different settings, often hearing upsetting and traumatic stuff. So I wonder if each of you could talk a little bit about how that has been for you both in your experience.
Yeah, so I've been working in suicide prevention now for about 12 years maybe. And I remember when I was first asked to take on this topic being terrified because it just felt so big and so powerful and so beyond me at that point. And I think I still feel that a lot even now, because especially when you're hearing people's experiences and hearing people's stories and you feel a kind of responsibility for doing something with that and making sure that the stuff that you do makes the changes that are needed and you feel that really matters. Mm-hmm. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing. Mm-hmm. But I guess for me, what that often leads to is I find it's sometimes quite difficult to switch off from that. Mm-hmm. So, and certainly the work that I do as well, we support people across Scotland who are also doing similar work, and we hear that time and time again. We see it, they're really driven by wanting to make a difference, wanting to make a change, and you can see that leads to them maybe working a little bit extra or putting in, more effort than is probably required and things.
Just taking things that little bit too far, personally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Does that chime with your experience, Andy?
Yeah, I think I would say that a lot of my earlier experiences are working in settings that are very intense, literally, and there's a pun in there, I'm sure, working in outdoor environments and on expedition courses and programs with young people, but also in residential settings, in communities and in other sort of community settings as well, and in prisons. And the intensity of some of those environments is somewhat overwhelming sometimes and a bit claustrophobic. And I think when you're working with the kind of material that we're talking about, the scale of the task sort of creates a bit of confinement in that space. So not only is it quite a claustrophobic space, but when you're working with the material in your own mind at the same time, you're trying to process and understand and make sense of what it is you're hearing and feeling and experiencing in that setting. And there's a lot to do internally to manage some of that stuff, which can, I mean, overwhelming is probably an overused word these days, but I can't think of a better one right now to kind of describe that. And the intensity of it, the slightly overwhelming nature of the confinement and the claustrophobia that can be there, at not every moment of every day, obviously. And I suppose I would also say there's something about, the expectation that, if you're out in nature, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
It is. But I think probably some of the environments we were in were very remote. So actually it's quite hard. It's not a nice walk around a park. It's 2 or 3 days from a road sometimes. So the intensity of that and knowing that you are there until you can find a way out with your group or the people you're working with. Yeah, it's a huge responsibility. And like I say, the scale of that, the task of being with that all of the time when you're in those environments is difficult, or it can be. Yeah. So
I'm thinking from what you've both been describing, going in and out of those roles. You're in your life, you're going back into the work, you're back in your life again. Managing the transition between the two things must be really tough.
Yeah, I think that's probably quite a common experience. I know it is for me. It's very hard sometimes to switch off, particularly when you feel so connected to the work that you're doing, and you feel that weight of expectation that, I think sometimes you feel, so much pressure to do it right that you almost begin to believe that if I don't do it, who else is going to do it? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then I think, like, I know working in suicide prevention, you start to see suicide everywhere.
Yeah.
You start to, because that's what you're thinking about it, you're talking about it all day long, and it becomes almost normal.
Yeah.
But then you just start to kind of see it everywhere. If you start to think about, you know, could this happen to me? Could this happen to someone in my family? Could this and that sort of stuff's really difficult to manage.
Yeah, yeah. I remember working with a suicidal client, and that was what she would often say, because it happened to a friend. She was seeing me because she'd lost a friend to suicide, and that thing of, this might just happen to me. This could just happen. And then me feeling the responsibility for not letting that happen to her. And that idea of, I was the one, this was early on in my career as a counsellor, I was the one standing between her and, you know, oblivion. And I wasn't, you know, I really wasn't. But at that point in my career, I thought I am. But a wonderful old supervisor of mine, she turned around to me one day when I was talking about this client. She said, "So who made you God?" And it didn't help massively at that time. But I've often gone back to that and thought, yeah, right. You know, there are other things that can be helping here. It's not just me.
And other people. I think that's the work that we do across the kind of different organisations that are involved in suicide prevention in Scotland. You know, we're working really collaboratively, and I think we now recognise that actually it needs us all. Like, you know, there's no one person that's got the key to solving this. You know, we need to work together.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. And I think it's so helpful to remember that it's always bigger than one person's intervention. Even if somebody might say in a feedback form, or, you know, in a review of their service experience, they might say, "Oh, the person I saw was really, you know, helpful and changed my life," or something to that effect. There's always been more to it than just that one individual. And if I am that individual, then I try to remember it's not just up to me to say, you know, save in inverted commas this person who's sat in front of me. I will do everything I can to offer them something that I think will be helpful, but I can't take responsibility for everything in their life that's ever happened to them and continues to happen to them and will happen after they leave. That's not mine to hold or to carry for them.
At the recent Suicide Prevention Scotland conference, we spoke to colleagues in organisations across Scotland about times when they have felt a bit stressed or overwhelmed at work. We asked them to tell us what might be something their colleagues or manager might notice about them which could indicate that they were finding things tough.
I think it's important that when you're starting to notice a friend or a family member or a work colleague is not really taking care of their own self-care and not responding positively to normal life events. And when you're asking the first question, "Are you okay?" and you're getting this generic "I'm fine," is to ask the second question, "But are you okay?" Always ask it twice, and be direct about talking about suicide. Be direct about it and ask if your friend or your colleague, your family member is having thoughts of suicide, and let them know that you're listening and it's important to you and it's important to them to be talking about their mental health and getting the help they need.
If I'm really quiet and not up for a laugh, I think that would set the alarm bells off, but I'm really lucky because we all look out for each other.
Good. You met my manager there. He's quite good at picking out when I'm not having a good day, if you will. I find that I tend to go quite quiet. I find that I can be quite irritant, if you will. So that's certainly for me that's one thing.
I think for me it's sometimes if I go a bit quiet, I am quite a confident person and quite a chatty person, and I think if there's a bit of radio silence, then that might indicate. But I'm quite lucky that I work in an organisation that There's lots of reasonable adjustments around wellbeing, and it's very rarely that I feel burnt out because things are in place to ensure that we don't get to that stage.
Thinking a little bit more about how we start to feel when, as you said, we get overwhelmed. I know from my experience, I always realise that I'm in need of a break when it's just that little bit too late. And I've kind of tipped over into withdrawing a bit from social life, just wanting to sit with a book, not really want to converse with people, don't want to hear anything from anybody that might be necessarily negative. And I did sort of try and set myself the rule of taking a week off every 6 weeks or so, but it was just not possible. I just couldn't do it, Self-employed, what can I say? So I go into what I call retreat mode, and that's when I feel that's when I feel the start of something that could become something bigger. What about you two?
Yeah, I definitely go into retreat mode. I think I start to withdraw, but I think for me, some of the signs that I know when I'm not coping well are quite physical. So in fact, it happened quite recently. I had a really, really busy week, and I first of all noticed that actually I was starting to have funny kind of work-related weird dreams, nothing too traumatic. But then I noticed that my jaw was really sore. And for me, I know that I'm grinding my teeth in my sleep. So that for me was that I knew then. So I was able to kind of take steps to kind of address that. And I think, one of the reasons that we were keen to do this podcast in Public Health Scotland was I'm part of the public mental health team. We work with a number of stakeholders, both internally and externally, doing a range of jobs, and actually may not, if you look at so think of someone like a data analyst within Public Health Scotland, may not from externally seem like the most high stress, potentially emotionally demanding job, but actually some of our staff are on a day-to-day basis being exposed to quite upsetting data information about things like self-harm and suicide, and it feels really important that those staff also are supported to kind of recognise what I was able to recognise, I think this is just a wee bit much for me just now. And I think recognising that there are staff like that across the whole of our workforce that are kind of unrecognised, the impact of the work that they're doing is really important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, some of the work we do at Lifelink is to offer services to organisations who might need to support their staff in that way that has been recognised. But I think you're absolutely right. There are many, many roles out there and all sorts of sectors where, people will come across material that could be potentially emotionally distressing for them. And everybody has their own sort of story and their own sensitivities to certain things, and something that might affect them one day might not affect them another day, or something that might affect one person might not affect another person. And so I think that's the important, part of what we try to offer is something where we can have a think about, the individuals in that organisation and how they need to be supported, that makes sense for the organisation, but also for those individuals. And you can't always get it right all the time, and you can't always have the luxury of an on-call, somebody you can call immediately and get some input. But actually, if you have that in mind about your workforce, even if it's not obvious necessarily that their role is dealing with, potentially traumatizing material or distressing material, then, at least you can have in the back of your mind somewhere about what if something happened, what support might somebody need? What could we offer? Who could we call on? I think to come back to your question about, how does it sit? How do we kind of separate work life? I mean, everybody struggles with that who's working from home these days and has a bit of isolation in their role, and maybe is not in an office where they can go, oh, that was a tough call, or or I just need half an hour to go and have a cup of tea and a decompression and a chat with a colleague, which the new normality of working from home has completely decimated that possibility in so many sectors. And lone working has always been risky, but now lone working includes working alone at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I quite often, I've spoken about my experience of kind of being on calls, quite intense Teams calls, sitting at home and being really absorbed in that. And then meeting comes to an end, you click leave and you're back in your kitchen on your own, having just heard a whole load of quite upsetting stuff. And what do you do with that? And I think one of the other things that we heard really clearly was that this isn't something that is just for some staff, like junior staff or less experienced staff, or actually staff who have been like working. So thinking about, just talking about myself, working in suicide prevention for 12 years, and I can still be upset by the things that I hear. I can still find myself on the verge of tears in a meeting, particularly if it's something that you're not expecting. So sometimes it can take you by surprise. And you think, oh, I'm okay with this. I've been doing this for 12 years. It's, it's okay. And then something happens and it's not. So I think it's really important that we do recognise that this is for everyone, that this idea of well-being and self-care is for everyone, no matter kind of how long they've been in the job or at what level or what it is that they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, you were talking earlier about, I know you used to work with groups of young people. You used to take them out into the wilds and, as you say, walk out in the wilds.
Occasionally
canoe,
bike,
all sorts of things with a team of people around you. What did you do as a team to sort of watch out for one another?
That's a really good question. And in those environments, what you have is the luxury of sort of time, which is basically infinite. You don't clock off at start at 9 and clock off at 5. You're there.
Yes. All the time.
And our programs at that point were up to 21 days. And so we had morning meetings, we had evening check-ins, and we would kind of walk alongside each other, checking in during the day. We'd be discussing, what was going on in the group and how to manage difficulties if there were any. So we were very much in contact, and the team was very tight and close and supported each other. But in truth, it wasn't really till afterwards where we'd get back, and the debrief mostly happened in the pub.
Yes.
And we'd spend the night after expedition kind of washing up kit and making sure that it was, we tidied up all our gear and everything after the group had left, and then we'd all go and spend a bit of time decompressing, is how I would describe it. And it was incredibly important to the process of getting back to normal of some sort. Yeah.
And in terms of signs of what we're talking about, so compassion fatigue, which obviously can lead to vicarious trauma, what kind of things were you looking out for in yourself, for example, and other people? Susie as well, what kind of things do you look for and ask people about?
Well, I think for us, as we would then go, we used to work a kind of almost an offshore pattern. So we'd work 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, or something similar to that. And really what you're looking for is, in myself anyway, is like, am I sleeping okay? Am I having thoughts of things that aren't going away? Am I what I would describe as normal in my relationships, or am I more withdrawn? Am I kind of present in the moment? Or am I focusing on other things that maybe aren't present? Those are the kinds of things. And obviously, if you start to notice that being particularly different, then that's when you might think, what's gone on here, and what is it that I'm being preoccupied by, that I've heard or experienced in a group or with someone I've been working with. Yeah,
I think there's lots, and there's lots that I've seen in other people. I've seen people who have been doing this kind of work for a long time, and suddenly you can see changes in their attitudes towards the work, or like kind of where previously they've been really positive and hopeful, suddenly they felt quite cynical and negative. Now, of course, that sometimes can be as a very real result of not seeing things change or things happen, but sometimes it is as a result, I guess, of just being in this kind of area of work. I think for me, and I'm no expert in vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue, but I think one thing that I've experienced is sometimes it's become sometimes working in the topic of suicide, it's become so normalised for me, and I've had to find ways to cope with what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I forget that other people don't see it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had like really difficult interactions where I've maybe made a joke or kind of been quite, spoken quite off the cuff about suicide in a way that probably I can do in some settings, but then you take it into your real life and you do the same thing. And then I've had situations where people have then said, oh, actually, I lost my family member to suicide, and I've been like, whoa. And and I think there's something for me about the kind of the walls that we build up for ourselves that allow us to cope.
Yeah.
We take that into our life and it's not necessarily a really helpful thing.
No, absolutely. It does feel quite important actually to make the distinction between compassion fatigue and burnout, because obviously burnout can result from any kind of stress, work deadline or bringing up young children, really stressful. But compassion fatigue is the direct result of listening and being exposed to distressing data, isn't it, of any kind, a lot of the time. And vicarious trauma is just secondary traumatization. I say just, it's secondary traumatization. It's what happens to us because we empathize, because human beings have these mirror neurons, which means that we can look at somebody with a happy face and feel happy. We can look at somebody with a sad face and feel sad. So, I mean, that's really simplistic, but this is what can happen. We can be secondarily traumatized by other people's stories. And I just think it's so vital that we keep this constant watch on ourselves and other people around us, seeing what's going on for them.
And do you think, Janet, like thinking back to that example of an analyst sitting looking at data, or someone who's transcribing transcripts from research interviews where people are talking about, do you think that risk of vicarious trauma and burnout is just as real for those staff as it is for someone who's maybe sitting with a client all day long?
Oh yes, absolutely. Because what I've just said, we empathise. We're human. We empathise with things. We can re-experience in our own imaginations. This is why the advertising world works really well. We can see somebody eating an ice cream and think we know exactly how that feels, how it would be. All of it, all the experience. We can go and see Jaws, for example. That shows my age, and feel really, really scared. We are just so good at picking up on what other people are going through. So yes, whether you're reading it, whether you're hearing it, however you're dealing with the data, it's just as possible to be traumatized by it.
Yeah, I think there's something about how you make sense of it. And if you're a data analyst, you're trying to make sense of data. And one really good way to make sense of something is to imagine yourself in a setting or in a situation, to make sense of it through your own lens and your own filters. And so if you're imagining yourself, in a situation that you're reading about, listening to, or transcribing or whatever, then yeah, absolutely, you're going to be thinking about, well, what would it be like if X happened to me? And that can really just touch a sensitivity or a vulnerability in somebody that they weren't expecting, or maybe they even consciously know it's there, but that they're not ready for it that day, or they weren't expecting it to come across their desk, and there it is, and then it's happened.
So sometimes we can be ready, sometimes we're not.
Yeah.
But at least if we can think about what we can do that can, safeguard us in some way, then we're some way towards protecting ourselves from vicarious trauma.
Yeah, because I guess for a lot of people, they almost don't have a choice. It's their job. It's what they're paid to do, and so we need to find ways of managing that and managing our well-being and still being productive in the jobs that we've been asked to do.
That's what we get paid for.
Yeah, and you wouldn't ask somebody working on a building site to walk onto a building site without PPE.
No.
And so the question is, what is the responsibility of the employer and of the organisations that are requiring people to do this work to support people and safeguard them from that? And if they can't, then how do they support them with the impact? That would be the question.
Yeah. And this is something that will be picked up in episode 3.
Glad to hear it.
Thank you very much, you two. That's been really interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hopefully you have found this episode useful and have had the chance to reflect on the impacts of the work that you do. It's so important that we pay attention to ourselves as we do this difficult work, because if we don't, there's a risk that we might find ourselves becoming overwhelmed. It's called being a human. But by arming ourselves with an awareness of the things to look out for and taking small steps to protect and enhance our well-being, we can hopefully continue to do the good work we do without experiencing some of the negative impacts we've spoken about today. I want to thank my guests in today's podcast, Andy and Susie, for taking the time to share their experiences to help us all learn and better understand the impact of the work we do and how we can be kind to and look after ourselves. In episode 2, we're going to look more closely at different ways we can support ourselves and our colleagues. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time to focus on you. And see you in episode 2. Thanks for listening to this podcast from Public Health Scotland and Suicide Prevention Scotland. Views or statements shared do not imply formal endorsement or promotion of any specific approach, service, or model. The guests in this episode have shared insight from their practice and experiences. This podcast is not intended to provide clinical guidance or professional advice.